Welcome back to another episode of the Positive Persistence Podcast, where we bring you stories to inspire you and strategies to help you tap into your potential and become your best self. I'm your host, Ian Bowen, and today I am joined by Nicolette Sowder. Nicolette is the founder of Wilder Child and Wildschooling, representing one of the largest global communities of nature-connected parents, home educators, and nature-based educators. Nicolette is dedicated to honoring, supporting, and connecting families who seek to educate and nurture their children through a bond with nature. She's designed a nature-rich whole child learning experience and is a Cedar Song certified educator at Strong Roots Nature School near Grand Rapids, Michigan. Together, her and her husband also run a 60-acre farm based on restoration agriculture principles, where she wild schools her two daughters. Nicolette, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you, and so happy to have another Midwesterner on the show. You are
Yes.
just a couple hours north of me here from Northwest Indiana, so that is awesome. And Nicolette, I have so many questions for you. Number one, if you could give our viewers and our listeners a description of what is wild schooling.
So, wild schooling came out of my own personal journey with my daughters. Well, specifically, my oldest is 12 now, but she was one at the time when we moved to Michigan, with the intention of just starting a farm. And we tried that in Northwest Indiana, and there just was some misalignment there. And so we came up to Michigan really based on some childhood nature-based memories that I had from coming up here. And it was the first time that I was surrounded by nature more than humans. So I grew up in a family where nature was absolutely a value, but it was different to have that modeled through nature as opposed to through like a human lens. And then out of that journey, my daughter really led the way, and she just needed so much, like her, in terms of somatic movement. The way she processed it was through her body. So dancing, singing, just a lot of running, a lot of climbing. And that regulation was something that as she got closer to going to kindergarten, it wasn't even a question as to whether or not I could take that away from her. So wild schooling was the name that I gave to our educational journey. And really, it is grown into a movement that I am humbled by. And the idea behind it is that it is more than a framework or more than a philosophy. It's really a way of being that is attuned to Mother Nature and aligned with Mother Nature. So seeing nature as a support system rather than something to be consumed. And it has some components, but basically that is the general sentiment behind it.
That is fascinating. So I'm writing down some notes because a couple of things that you said I want to come back to. So when you say somatic movement, you're talking about the dancing, the jumping, the basically free flow movement of your body.
Yeah, just like if resistance would come up within her, then how she would be integrating that resistance was in partnership with her body's also with her body's response to the environment. So that was how she was regulating it. She's essentially co-regulating with our biome, with our landscape. So taking that away would have been similar to taking away a parental figure with which children co-regulate.
And when you say co-regulate, are you speaking of like regulating their nervous system and how they,
regulating the nervous system, which the nervous system is not fully developed. We talk a lot about brain development in children, but it's relatively new science and understanding about the nervous system. We're still learning so much about it and what that even means.
Hmm.
But we do know that it takes a long time to develop the nervous system, and that children co-regulate with the nervous systems that are around them. And nature has its own system within which, when that goes away, it has similar consequences to removing like a trusted regulatory system.
Sure. Similar to taking somebody out of a very comfortable, familiar environment and putting
Hmm.
them in somewhere totally different.
Yeah, like we have things within us that actually don't get activated if they're not exposed to that system. So, like birdsong, they'll see people's brains with who have not been exposed to birdsong, like repeated, and then people's who have been, and there's literally a set of skill set, a knowledge set, and a regulation piece that just does not get activated.
Really, that's amazing. So what I'm hearing you say is like the bird song will actually trigger a locked door, if you will. And behind
Hmm.
that locked door is an experience or a skill set or something that
Hmm.
may not have been revealed if the repeated bird song wasn't heard. So
Yeah, just like language.
that's amazing.
Hmm.
Wow. Okay. So, Nicolette, I want to ask. So, I know that you have a master's in writing, and
Hmm.
you were a teacher in a traditional school
Yes.
at one time.
Hmm.
How did you go from there to where you are now?
Um, I enjoyed my time. Like I learned so much. I don't have anything. I don't have a negative or judgmental view of the traditional educational system. I have the same view that I have of like my own life. I think about things in terms of like everybody has different needs and everybody's at a different place. And there are different privileges that are afforded to some people and not other people. And people need to be where they're at and do what they're at, or be where they're, yes, and just do work with what they're working with.
Hmm.
But I did see within that context that some of the children were, there was just a way in which the environment was not supportive to some of the trauma that was locked inside of their bodies. And trauma is a big word. It could just,
Yeah.
I tend to be kind of describing it as resistance. And when I would take them outside, which was completely weird for that time. I mean, now this nature-based movement is much more normalized. It's similar to like natural health, right? And like my parents were doing it in the 90s. That was very weird. Um, so like when I was teaching, it was still, you just didn't take the kids outside. And these were high schoolers. But when they would go outside, um, it was like giving them a nutrient and space within which to just be. And
Hmm.
I think there was a safety there that they had never really received that from, not all of them, but many of them hadn't received that from the figures in their life, where they had the space to just be. And there was a lot of release. You see like talk about, okay, just send them outside, or and you'll see when kids go outside, they if they haven't been outside regularly,
Hmm.
they tend to have a really big settling, and at first they'll have a big explosion. That's always the time I'm really aware of, like being careful around safety, like when they first go out, because there's just a big release. And
Yeah.
so I thought, what if we just started there instead of just giving that nutrient a little bit at a time? It's like having a healthy diet and a healthy just physical, life consistently, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to work out once or have, one good meal. And
Right.
so that was just, it was a curiosity, but that was not even, I'd never even really had that thought until my daughter. It became for me something that I was like, oh, this would hurt specifically her. And then I reflected back on what a need and a right, a human right that it is for us to be able to be held in that way, where we can just be. So it has been my mission to just invite people back into their own needs. Like, what does your body need, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I was in school, there was a consent issue going on about things were taken away that I had not consented to. We take it for granted, right? And there's so many talks about consent in our society, and yet our children do not consent to be taken away from their trusted, nurturing, like, for all intents and purposes, when they build deep relationships, they see it almost as a person. And there is a lot of anthropomorphizing going on there, but it is my hope to invite people to, yeah, feel, like, just feel more, and that you can choose, that there are other options, other possibilities, right?
Yeah.
You can empower yourself.
Yeah. Well, empowering yourself is very powerful. We
Mm-hmm.
definitely. How did you go from then your traditional school role into creating Wildschooling?
I listened. I really got humbled on the landscape, and it's interesting starting a business. Well, at first I wasn't really starting a business, but I was blogging at a time where nature based education, you went from like environmental ed to nature based education to like forest school education to now really coming into a deeper ancestral indigenous kinship education. So, there's this evolution that I went through within myself, going from like, we are going to use nature for a craft.
Right.
And it's a very capitalistic, I was taught it, like, we're
Well,
gonna
I would
do,
extent that most teachers go to with nature is that we're going to use
yeah,
it for a craft or
right.
and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, or I'm going, like, in this curriculum, it's Frog Week. So we're going to do frogs, but we have no relationship with the frogs. And we have, it's not even like you don't see any, because I'd studied a lot of things that were not present in the environment. So
Hmm.
instead of, I let go of a lot of control. And that was reflected in my own personal journey. So there was just this continuum and connection between what I was, like, nature is asking me to do versus what I had to do personally within my life. So if
Hmm.
I'm letting go of control of, okay, it's more of an emergent curriculum. So we're, instead of like looking at the book and doing it in exact order, we're like, it's a mixture of listening to, like, looking at what's out there and trying to cast that thread back inside. So for example, like right now, things are letting go, right, in our environment, in our biome, like, things are changing color. We're
Yeah.
at the end of the solar cycle, so we are losing light, and so I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to consider that and try to map that back into, oh, like, what might I need to let go of? Do some reflecting back and take the time to compost my own experience, just like it's being composted out there. So
Hmm.
then when that new season comes, I have a rich soil within which to, like, grow out of. Whether people want to believe that, like, people can be all over the spectrum and it's going to be helpful. I think about it like working out in a way. Like, you don't have to go straight to like the heavy weights to see, like, the growth. Like, you're going to get some benefits just from wherever you're at with that experience.
Yeah.
So you don't have to believe that it's you and you're it. You can just believe that, hey, that's like a really cool metaphor. And it's happening in front of my eyes. So why not tether to that lesson and experience? Like, children are going to grow. Let's just look at it practically.
Hmm.
If I, like, as an educator, I'm going to get it's going to make way more sense contextually speaking if I'm teaching about um, something from an environmental and an emotive perspective, to just look at what's out there in order to like connect it to. And kids are going to like, I get that. And that's also ancestrally wired on top of it. So to not use that, now that I've been in it so much, it's very hard for me to explain what it's like you're trying to drive without a car. It's like all because you don't think you need
Yeah.
it.
Did your what did your colleagues think when you started describing this idea that you had, or this passion that you had, that you were going to kind of change gears and go in a different way?
Well, at that point, I still appreciate and love all my colleagues and the work that they're still doing within the system,
Mm-hmm.
within that system, because we're all within the system, a system, right? So within that work, I just sort of let them go in that regard, as to not try to control their experience and just find the points of connection that we could find. And there are many, I've like standing on the shoulders of giants, because there are so many people who have done this work. And I've really learned, like in Finland and the Nordic countries, the forest school movement has really come from a lot of the lineage there. And
Mm-hmm.
then here, the indigenous and First Nations people who are still here have been doing this the way they've been doing it forever. I honor that and really respect, like, the origins, or the culture of the land that I'm on. And so, and then also just my Celtic roots. I've really gone on a like ancestral journey around that, and found my own way, as opposed to appropriating, and reclaiming somebody else's culture.
Yeah,
So I'd say it's just been a journey of like letting everybody be where they're at, but confidently turning towards where I'm at. And that's been really beautiful, you know, to just find my own way. That's been a journey throughout like my whole emotional life, to find my way.
that's awesome. How did you start this whole process? I mean, were you aware of the different types of like forest schooling and wild schooling that were out there, and that was something that you said, you know what, I really like this idea. I'm gonna do this myself.
Yeah, I didn't see a huge, I saw a need for to integrate the wild back into, like, to have a rewilding element of the home education movement.
Hmm.
Um, and because like there's this concept of unschooling. I don't know how familiar you are with homeschooling. I was going through all the different philosophies. Like, okay, what
You're
am I
gonna
gonna
have
do? I
to.
didn't even know, like, planned on this. I did not, that's kind of been and it's still scary. I still have fear come up. Um, it's hard to walk a different way, but I, um, yeah, so I saw that, and so I was going to orient to that. And then in the unschooling, that was like so radical, because people also don't understand that philosophy, but it really is. There's a process of deschooling, and it's a
What? Yes.
month for every year you've gone to traditional school. And it's
Okay.
really just like a complete rewiring of like, okay, what just happened to me? Just taking stock, slowing down, and trying to reorient like the power structure, like trying to get a handle on the power structures, like what was the curriculum, what part did I consent to, what part I didn't I consent to, what did I really learn, like what parts were gaslit, that was a great experience, what part do I want my children to have, just for the sake of being like integrated in society. I didn't
Hmm.
want to be a rubber band, because we see that a lot with like parents. Like I've been through it where I'm doing something totally different just because my parents did it the other way, because I'm having a strong somatic reaction to what they did. So
Yeah.
instead of just like, so that deschooling process brings you back into your power center, instead of just like, oh, I'm living a lot different from my parents, but I'm only doing it because I mean, I'm still connected to them because I'm actually in opposition, so it's still a control.
Yeah.
So deschooling was so powerful for me. But I didn't want to be in opposition. And I thought that nature piece had to be in place for me. And then as I started to need a more community for my children, I created what's called the Wildschooling villages, which people would understand them as a co-op, but they're aligned to a cyclical seasonal cycle. And then my friend Kristen Sowder created Strong Roots, which is my kids, and that's so filling the gap. And that's a more maybe people will probably have heard of a traditional forest school where you're going there. It's paid, like a paid program.
Hmm.
So I mean, there are thousands popping up all over the country. People have heard of the term for the most part. And so that's like on the spectrum, an easier thing for people to access. And people come out of school for that. It's not just homeschoolers. And where you see, especially boys, I don't want to gender things too much, but like in the classroom, I have seen it because I'm a teacher there. I have seen it so many times. They are troublemakers. They are it's not working for them. They will come to Strong Roots and they are leaders. And that just blows my mind.
Wow. Yeah.
How can we not like have empathy for that?
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's incredible. I want to ask you a question about something that you mentioned, and I'm hoping that you could unpack this for me. You have a quote here saying that my passion and heart's mission is to help families step back into the circle of wild things and bond with
Mm.
nature. When rooted in that relationship and ancient connection, we heal, we flow, we fly. Could you tell us what you mean by that?
Yes. Most people are trying to do things alone. Um, it's a very individualistic society. Not all societies are like it, but like in the US, it's very hyper individualistic. Incredible benefits from that. This is it's not about getting rid of that. It's not about going backwards in time. But the way that we approach nature is so consumptive. We will ski, we will swim, we will use nature, and we don't have any gratitude or understanding of like, hey, just like a simple thank you on vacation. Like we just can't like, take a moment. And what I think that taking a moment is getting back into the cycle. And what I mean by that is what tends to happen is that we are not in a cycle. We are not aware, and we are very afraid of the idea that we are in a cyclical process. And as soon as I started working with the moon, which seems very woo woo, but has actually been, and I'm not even talking about astrology, I'm talking about astronomy. As soon as I started anchoring to the moon, it gave me and my children a very tangible, very exciting, very clear way to work with cycles. So I started in order to get back into these cycles of growth, to understand that it is a process. And by it, there's this idea of life, but let's just take one issue. Let's say there's something in a child's life that keeps coming up. They keep doing this, that type of thing. So a
Yeah.
pattern, a pattern,
Yeah.
a pattern,
Hmm.
resistance.
Hmm.
We push, they push back. That's to me, I describe that as something's up. So then the invitation there is to identify what's up and to hook it to the lunar cycle. We go through phases. You can release it, right? You learned the lesson on the new moon. You have a new intention. It doesn't matter. And that might not all happen in one lunar cycle, which is like 28 days. That's okay. Like some cycles are like yearly, then there's a bigger cycle. But this is just like a tiny, working with one thing that keeps coming up. Then you get to that full moon and you're like, okay, it's illuminating a lot more. Like what can you see now? Can you get a different perspective? And you're on that, and then if you're timed with that cycle, then you're releasing into the phase, the waning phases. You're getting it out of your body, you know. Or what happens? You carry it. And what I see around me is not as a judgment, but because I do it too, is most adults carry. They keep carrying through the cycle because they actually don't know how to release
Right.
properly. And they have no context. It's like our education system said, learn this. What was our context for learning? So you could get a job. So we
Yep.
don't have a deep, personal, empowered reason for learning. But nature can give us a landscape and map and a way, a framework for actually empowering our own sense of release and growth. And it is unbelievable. And then you're like, wait, I am. And then the next logical leap is like, oh, I am nature, which is proven by science. Like we're all stardust and bone, and it's like, like the electrons are all connected, and we're starting to learn all that stuff. So I think like just relearning how to just do that and do it in a fun way. It doesn't have to be all about the hard stuff. Like we celebrate every full moon as like, hey, it's shining a light on all that's come before us. And enjoy the learning, even though some of it's hard.
Yeah, I love what you are talking about. It is such a different way of thinking. And so I'm curious, you use the word woo woo, right? So I don't mean to speak for others, but I have to admit that when most people hear about this and hear
Yes.
about the philosophies that are involved in it and the learning process that they're involved with it, that's
Mm-hmm.
the only word that pops into their mind. Like
Yeah.
this is stuff is woo
Mm-hmm.
woo. First of all, I applaud you for seeing an angle that you felt needed to be
Mm-hmm.
followed, and that your passion led you to do this, and you pushed to make it happen, which I imagine probably wasn't easy. You're doing it.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you say to the individuals who hear this or are maybe reading an article about it and are like, what is
Mm-hmm.
this? Is some woo woo stuff. What do you
I
say to
I
individuals?
say like no pressure for one thing. These things take time. Nature's on a much longer cycle, but I would look and just try to look at. I would say for them to look at their life with a loving heart and more of an open mind.
Mhm.
That what is working, what's working, what what's not working. Like generally speaking, we tend to as a society have things in common that don't seem to be quite working. I think I could take that leap. A lot of things working, some things aren't working. Like for
Yeah.
example, pace. Pace. Um, Almost every parent I've talked to seems to be going where their life is outpacing like what they're able to handle. And some of that is due to just like economic privilege. And some of that is due to like wounds around the consent. So, and fear about not fitting in. Sports, I was an A+ soccer player. Like I was that was my thing.
Hmm.
And I don't have any regrets in my life because I don't think about my life that way. But I do now as I'm, getting older, want to come more I want to kind of relook at the consent that I wasn't offered. No, like no judgment on my parents. We didn't have any money growing up. And for them, that was like a way to help me be in the society and get stronger and connect and learn all the skill sets. And it was wonderful. But it's okay to look back on something that was seemingly right at the time that I might want a different generational experience for, like there's an indigenous teaching about 7 generations ahead. So just because it was right for me, that I was located at a very specific point of my generational wheel. My children are not. So I want them to have more empowerment and more choice in to say, hey, this is an option. Music is an option too, right? Like the
Right.
guitar is something that I never knew what I was giving up. So I don't want to project that onto my children,
Mhm.
but I want to widen the landscape, right? I want to include nature. I want to widen the diversity. Diversity is incredibly important to me because I think it's like lessens the ego, right? So what am I, where am I putting you on a path? And I also want to be open. Like when I talk to my kids, a lot of times I'll say to them, do you want my slant? And, sometimes I don't do that to them because I'm like, you're going to get my experience because this one I know is gold. But others, I'm like, this is my slant. And they're like, sometimes they say no. And sometimes they say, yes, I do want your perspective, but thank you for telling me that that's your perspective. So there's just like an opening for me around choice and allowing my children to try lots of different things. And I'll
Yeah.
tell you, there's a lot of work around fear with it and balance. Like, where do I want them? Like, I want them to have the language where they could just be anywhere and meet anyone and not feel like othered. But at the same time, I want to empower them to not have fear around being different.
Yeah.
So I'm working with those two, aspects.
That's interesting. So there's a couple of things that you said that I want to kind of circle back on. And first one is the word, did you say othered?
Mm-hmm.
Can you break that down for us? Like, I assume I know what you mean by that, but if you
Yeah,
could,
like the weird homeschooler. I mean, it's like, you know, othered in the things that are important to our society are a way of connecting. Like
mhm,
people will connect through that and feel safe around each other.
mhm,
And sports and specifically are a way of it's like small talk, but it's big talk. It regulates, people are not regulating through music and nature and village type, like we did for thousands of years. We regulated around the fire, we had shared culture, shared storytelling, elder circles. We're not regulating that way, but if you meet another person who knows your team, it's going to be a sense of camaraderie that if my children are in opposition, and I think that's the key, if they're in judgment,
mhm.
they will not only not be included in that, they will actually judge and feel completely separate. And I am totally living proof that there's a way to be in your power and be in your purpose and be in your creativity and be in your vision while still just being totally accepting and able to like not lose your connection to your fellow human,
Right. So
right?
not being, yeah, not losing that connection
Yeah,
to another human being because you are viewed or you may view them as simply different.
right. But I mean, look at everything in nature. Look how different a green beetle is from an oak tree.
Mhm,
And that there's billions of genetic and expressive diversity on our planet. To think that we would not reflect that is, it's just, we're moving that way. We're moving that way. It's an unstoppable force.
yeah. It
Hmm.
sounds like we as humans get in our own way of being able to convene with nature, which is something I want to also circle back on. And you were talking about the lessening of the ego, which I think connects to something you said
Mm.
earlier in our conversation about our relationship with nature and not being a support system versus how we consume it. And
Hmm.
can you explain a little bit more about like the support system versus consumption idea that you were talking about?
Yeah, I mean,
Is it?
we tapped one of the maples here. I never tapped maples before coming up here, so everything was like new to me. Um, we were just in survival mode for so much of my childhood. And so to be able to share these experiences is like where my heart is at, and I really don't get hung up on how much time people are able to be out because I think that just puts like a monetary or a time value on it. People could be, you can run a marathon and have not as much connection as 1 minute under like a maple. So
Mhm.
time is, not linear in the way that we think about nature connection. And then there's a lot less shame, right? So we tapped a maple, and my daughters were young, and there was a little spile, like the little silver part that comes out of the tree, and my daughters were like sucking from it. And I had one of those moments, like one of those big moments where I'm like, what am I seeing? Like just download. And I just stared. I'm like, that's like a mother for them. That all of a sudden I started to realize, very humbling, and realize that in whatever, if this is my story, this story works for me, right? Like I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything, but
Yeah.
the way that I contextualize it in that moment was that I had help and I was co-parenting with nature, and I get a lot of pushback on this term because people are like, is nature going to pay the bills? And, there's a lot of stress that comes up of like, I'm doing it all on my own. This is crap. Um, but I'll tell you, I'll take any help. I'll take any help. And the more that I start understanding it as relational, again, it could be a mind trick. We want to see it that way. The more it becomes relational. It's like any relationship. I mean, like my marriage. The more I see it, and in this context of growth, oh, the more that things that happen between my husband and I are within that context. So then I started just experiencing everything in nature as a trusted parent beside me. Even the dangerous parts where I was like, oh, well, that's an invitation to learn how to go slow. I started, like, parents, sometimes there's tough lessons.
Hmm.
So
Absolutely.
then just everything became relational, and like the birds right now. We throw a going away party for the birds, and
Yes.
we read a story about the hummingbird that gets confused and can't like orient and doesn't know where to migrate. So we find that part in ourselves that is like knows where to go. And we're thankful for all of our friends, and they learn the names of the birds. So there's a science and the migrational science, and it's all in one. And I'm like, thank you for teaching me about like sometimes parts of us need sun, sometimes we need rest, and not everything is the same. There's all kinds of lessons that, if when I'm looking at the relationship that way, that I would have never thought to teach that.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, and when we go into nature in that way, like as a reunion, if we walk out the door and we're greeting a trusted like friend, there's just so much there, so much more we're going to see rather than going out and just like not knowing that we're in it. It's just like it basically comes down to being conscious as opposed to unconscious.
Yeah.
And that's something that I've been, really everything's kind of rooted in that. Are you conscious? Like, are you here,
Just
aware? Like,
in a way. Yeah.
are you aware, of where you are? And it doesn't have to be perfect. Sometimes we're in and out. But one practice that I love I think parents can start is sit spot. So sit spots are a tree, any tree, could be on a sidewalk, could be, anywhere. It's just you return to that tree and you sit, could start with a minute. If you're at a little bit of a more beginning part, just one breath in, one breath out, build a relationship with one tree. Like, you don't have to suddenly go skiing and be like, thank you, mountain. Like, it's too much, But if you're going with the tree and stick with the sit spot for one seasonal cycle, which is winter solstice to winter solstice, 1 year. And if you can't do that, one moon cycle. But it's just nice to see like the cycle. And, if you think about it, the cycle of a person, and you just sit there in silence, you just observe and start with a minute. And very simple, but
Yeah.
also life-changing.
I'm thinking about, most people and they already have sit spots.
Mm-hmm.
And those sit spots typically are inside or they're a lazy boy and they're watching TV,
Oh
and
my gosh.
I'm thinking to myself, like, why is that more
Mm,
normal than going out into nature and just hanging out? Right? Most of us are more prone to, oh, I had a rough day. I'm going to sit down and watch TV for hours, as opposed to
mhm,
I need to relax, so I'm going to go
mhm,
and just chill out in nature for a bit.
mhm,
Why is it that it's
mm.
not the latter?
Well, we're pretty overstimulated, so I can understand why people want to veg. Because if you ignore your own needs all day, you're just gonna, in a way, it's kids' way of saying, finally, I get my own time.
Hmm.
And I'll go back to this idea of giving ourselves away, giving ourselves away. But the irony of the television is that that's still somebody else's needs. Like, that's all commodified.
Hmm.
I mean, our attention is our new currency. So anytime we're giving our attention away, somebody's making money. This isn't even conspiracy, it's just like business. I went to business school, like, how it works. It's all like awareness is the most important thing. Once you have people's awareness, which means intention, where is my intention? And you
Yeah,
could kind of extrapolate that down. How are they going to spend their time? But how you spend your time follows people's intention. So wherever you're directing your mind energy.
hmm,
So imagine your mind energy has been co-opted all day. Your attention has been co-opted in a chair all day. You're done. You have no power. You have no actual self will, which is kind of scary. I don't live my life in fear, but I do think just to like be so broken down that you have none of your own will. Your will is so low that the only will you have left is to stroll. That's the end game. There's the money. Then you're just going to start spending because there's no protection. It's actually like you're boundaryless. And I see
wow,
so many children, they just don't have boundaries.
yeah,
It's hard to watch. And I see their boundaryless little selves being commodified, So it's it's naive as a parent to think that our children's attention isn't being commodified. I mean, at this point, you know,
well, I don't think that
um,
most parents realize that their attention is being commodified, right? Like
no,
it's like we're in the matrix and we don't realize
I know.
this is going on, or we just don't want to think
Yeah,
about it. I guess
but it's
that's
hard to look at. Like, I think it takes, I needed a lot of support to get where I'm at.
mhm,
I've had support through plants. I've had support through people who have gone through the process of reestablishing their will and reestablishing, their power. And so this has been like a 5-year intentional process, and I don't think it's for the faint of heart. So I do think there's safety that needs to be established, but it is in our zeitgeist. It is in the conversation. I mean, you and I are having the conversation now,
Mhm.
and I do believe that people are going to start to feel safe enough to start looking at um, where their will has been. Because it's scary. Think about it. Like all of a sudden, you wake up and you look around, you're like, my life has completely, like, what choice of is mine? You know, my time, my energy, my vitality, my health, my children's generational path, my ancestors. Like you start where I live, what I wear, what I eat. It it can be. It's quite like there's a lot of unexpressed grief in our society. You know, we'll show a little emotion, but not like in the process. I encourage my kids when we're cycling with the moon, and you know, as a female, we're using the cycles to
Mm.
actually like it's okay, just release. Like it's okay. You didn't have control. That's okay. Like empowerment is a process. So my point in saying all this is like it takes a lot. So to be a source of strength the way that you are, and a source of like light in saying like we can do this together type energy
Mhm.
is I think what is needed more than anything in our society right now.
Agreed.
And we could like, and then if we can direct people to their own empowerment, but then say, look at nature can help us. That's like we're not only saying I can help you. It's like, hey, I've been helped by,
Right.
and let's do this together. You know, so it's happening.
I love
Hmm.
it. That's awesome. Nicolette, how can our listeners and our viewers find out more about your book, The Wilder Child, and more about the principles of wild schooling?
So I have a website, wilderchild.com,
Mhm.
and I have a children's book coming out that is based on a poem that I wrote that was just, I'm amazed at just wrote this poem, and it was like a late night creative burst. And it's really traveled all around the world. It's on the back of like legal pamphlets, and it's on some wall in the UK. I'm not even saying like tooting my own horn. I'm saying this is how real creativity does not look. How, you know, it mostly comes in the side door, like without the ego. So that's been funny to like let it fly and let people make songs of it and just do its thing. But then Random House contacted me in an Instagram message. Okay, if you could understand how crazy that was for me. Like I went to school for poetry and I wrote all kinds of, I always wanted to be published. Always wanted, of course, power versus force. It's like never happened.
Yeah.
And then when I was least expecting it, out of the corner of my eye, oh God, it you know, it happened. So that is a children's book that is coming out and is available in December. So I'm happy to have it be an expression of what's possible when you just let go.
Yeah.
And then my membership, the Kids Moon Club, which is for all families, it's not homeschooling focused. It opens up November 1st. And that's for people who really feel like, okay, I want to get back on the cycle. Like I'm ready. I'm ready to step in a fun way. We celebrate all the 12 moons of 2025, and it runs from winter solstice to winter solstice. And it is such a fun, like any child, regardless of background, has just resonated with it. It comes through story and through craft and through recipes and those full moon parties. So it's a simple, time tested way. This is my 8th year running it. So
Wow.
yeah, I would say anyone out there who's really like, okay, I'm ready to live again. I'm ready to be in a living, growing cycle. Like basically, that's the first thing that's really what changed my life. Is I had to say, oh, okay, I'll grow now. I'm ready to change. Like I can change. I can
Time.
grow. And having my children, it's hard to be witnessed by your own children and growth because I assumed it stopped at like after I got out of college. That was the way. It's like the job is the end of growth.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, through the membership, it's really at its core just like I'm ready to grow again. And not everybody wants that, and that's okay. So yeah, that's where you can find me, and just reach out to me if you have questions, like info@wilderchild.com, just whatever you need. I just want to be a support system.
Awesome. I love
Hmm.
all of the positivity and positive energy that is coming from you. That's just
Mm,
that's awesome.
mm,
And I want to thank you, Nicolette, for joining us today on the show and
mm.
schooling us on wild schooling. And I want to thank all of
Mm,
our viewers and our listeners
mhm,
for tuning in to this episode.
mm,
And you guys have all the information now if you want to follow up with Nicolette and ask her some questions about wild
mm,
schooling and the Kids Moon Club and get your hands on the Wilder Child book. So that is
mm,
going to be it for this episode. I want to remind you guys to stay positive, stay persistent, and remember that mindset is everything.
mm.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.